The sun was already high when the trouble began, climbing slowly over the flat desert and turning the sand pale gold. The settlement woke early every day, but that morning felt different. There was a tightness in the air, a quiet that did not belong to dawn. People moved without speaking much, their eyes sliding away from one another. Even the wind seemed careful, brushing past the low buildings as if it did not want to disturb what was about to happen. She had been awake long before the others. Sleep had come and gone in short, broken pieces. She sat on the edge of her narrow bed, hands folded, listening to footsteps outside. She already knew they were coming. News traveled fast in a place like this, even when no one said anything out loud. When the door opened, no one shouted. No one needed to. Two men stood there, faces hard and distant. They did not meet her eyes. One of them read from a paper, his voice flat like he was describing the weather. She was being accused of betrayal. The word felt strange, almost unreal. It was a heavy word one people used carefully, or at least they used to. She stood slowly, her legs steady even though her chest felt tight. She asked what proof there was, but her question drifted into the air unanswered. The men were only there to take her, not to explain. Outside, the settlement gathered as if pulled by the same invisible thread. People stood in small groups, whispering or pretending not to notice. Some crossed their arms. Some stared at the ground. A few looked at her openly, their faces filled with something close to disappointment, as if she had failed them on purpose. She walked between the men without resisting. Dust rose with every step, clinging to her clothes. She could feel the sun warming her skin, the same sun she had worked under every day since coming here. She remembered thinking once that the desert was honest. It showed you exactly what it was. Now she wasn't so sure. They led her past the storage shed, past the water tanks, and toward the edge of the settlement where the land grew rough and uneven. A barrel cactus stood there, wide and solid, older than anyone living nearby. People avoided it most of the time, giving it space, as if it deserved respect simply for surviving so long. She stopped when they told her to stop. Someone stepped forward holding a piece of cardboard tied to a string. The words were written in thick, dark letters. She did not need to read them to know what they said. She had heard the phrase whispered already. Traitor, last of the rest of the sentence was unfinished, but the meaning was clear. It was not just about her. It was about where she came from, about a past that some people never forgot, no matter how much time passed. They tied her hands carefully, almost gently, as if trying to convince themselves they were being fair. No one looked at her face while they did it. Someone adjusted the sign and stepped back. Then they left. No speech, no announcement, just people slowly turning away one by one as if the scene might disappear if they didn't watch. She stood there alone, the cactus at her back, the sign resting against her chest. The desert stretched out in front of her, wide and quiet. A bird crossed the sky and vanished into the distance. At first she focused on breathing. Slow in, slow out. Panic would not help her now. Panic never helped anyone. She had learned that long ago. She thought about how quickly things had changed. Just yesterday, she had been part of the morning work crew, checking supplies, counting containers, making notes in the ledger. She had argued with the supervisor about the route the delivery team planned to take. It was risky, she had said. The ground near the dry wash was unstable. They should wait. They hadn't listened. Now the supplies were gone and she was standing here with a sign around her neck. The sun climbed higher. Heat pressed down steadily, not cruel but unrelenting. Time slowed. She became aware of every sound, the distant hum of a generator, the crunch of footsteps far away, the faint rustle of wind moving through dry grass. Memories filled the empty space. She remembered arriving at the settlement years ago, carrying little more than a bag and a promise that she would work hard. People had been cautious then, watching her closely, but she had proven herself. She fixed things others couldn't. She stayed late. She took extra shifts without complaint. Slowly, suspicion had softened into acceptance, or so she thought. She wondered who had decided she was the easiest one to blame, someone who knew her well enough to know she wouldn't fight back. Someone who understood that her history made her convenient. From where she stood, she could see the edge of the settlement. She could see people going about their day, trying to pretend this was just another morning. Some glanced her way and quickly looked away. Others stared longer, curiosity winning over shame. One man stood apart from the rest. He had known her longer than most. He had argued with her, laughed with her, trusted her. When the accusation was announced, he had felt something twist inside his chest, but he had pushed it down. Doubt was dangerous. Doubt made things complicated. Now he stood with his back turned, staring at the horizon as if the answer might be written there. She saw him. Of course she did. For a moment their eyes met. In his, she saw conflict, uncertainty, and something else he did not want to admit. She did not call out to him. She did not shake her head or try to explain. If he believed the sign, her words would mean nothing. Silence became her only defense. As the hours passed, the settlement grew louder, then quieter again. People finished their tasks and retreated indoors. The sun began its slow journey west. Shadows shifted, stretching long across the sand. She adjusted her weight slightly, careful not to draw attention. Her arms ached, but she refused to show it. Showing weakness would only confirm what they already believed. She thought about truth and how fragile it was, how easily it bent under fear, how quickly it disappeared when people needed a simple answer. She was not afraid of waiting. Waiting was something she knew well. What frightened her was the idea that no one would ever question the story they had been given. Still, deep inside, a quiet hope remained. Someone would notice something that didn't fit. Someone would remember a detail that had been ignored. Until then, she stood tied to the cactus, wearing a lie around her neck, waiting under the open sky, while the desert watched and said nothing at all. The sun kept moving, slow and steady, as if it had all the time in the world. She did not. Still, she forced herself to stay calm. The desert had taught her patience. You could not rush heat away, and you could not argue with the sky. You could only endure. Her mouth felt dry. Every breath reminded her how little shade there was. The barrel cactus behind her was solid and silent, its wide body blocking only a small part of the sun. The sign rested against her chest, moving slightly whenever the wind passed. She tried not to think about the words written on it. Words had power only when people believed them. She focused instead on small things. The sound of wind brushing over sand, the distant call of a bird, the way the light changed color as the day went on. Paying attention to these details helped her stay present, helped her avoid drifting into fear. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. At some point, someone approached. She could hear footsteps crunching softly on the sand. She did not turn her head right away. When she did, she saw a young woman standing a few steps away, holding a water container. For a brief moment, hope flared in her chest. But the young woman only looked at her, eyes wide and unsure. She shifted her weight, glanced back toward the settlement, and then stepped away without saying a word. The water container stayed full. The hope faded, leaving behind a dull ache. She remembered teaching that same young woman how to repair a cracked pipe months earlier. They had laughed together then, joking about how everything seemed to break at the worst time. That memory felt like it belonged to another life. Her thoughts drifted to the morning before everything changed. She had stood near the supply shed, sunlight still soft, pointing at the map spread across a table. She had explained her concerns clearly. She had even offered to go along to check the route herself. The answer had been firm. There was no time, there was no need. Now there was time, too much of it. She wondered if the people who accused her felt satisfied, if they believed they had done the right thing. Sometimes people needed someone to blame just to feel safe again. Order mattered more than truth. The heat grew stronger. Sweat rolled down her back. Her legs trembled slightly, but she held herself steady. She would not collapse. Not yet. As the afternoon wore on, memories came more freely, slipping into her thoughts like visitors who did not need permission. She remembered her childhood, moving from place to place, never staying long enough to be fully trusted. She remembered learning early how to stay quiet, how to observe, how to make herself useful. She had carried that lesson into adulthood. Work first, questions later. Prove yourself again and again. And still it had not been enough. From where she stood, she could see the edge of the settlement clearly now. The buildings shimmered slightly in the heat. Doors opened and closed. Life continued. People cooked, rested, talked. Her punishment had already become background noise, except for one person. He had moved since the morning. Now he stood closer, though still far enough to pretend he wasn't watching her. His arms were crossed. His face was tight, his jaw set. He looked like a man trying to convince himself of something he did not fully believe. She noticed how often his gaze drifted toward the supply shed, then toward the path where the delivery team had traveled. He was thinking. That alone mattered. She remembered the first time she met him. He had been suspicious, direct, asking questions without softening his words. She had respected that. Over time, they had learned to work together, to rely on each other's strengths. Trust had grown slowly, carefully. Trust, she knew now, could also fade quickly. The sign shifted again as the wind picked up. The cardboard edge rubbed against her skin. She ignored it. Physical discomfort was easier to manage than the weight of being misunderstood. She wondered who had written the words. The handwriting was neat, confident. Someone who believed in their story enough to make it permanent. The afternoon light softened slightly, but the heat remained. Her vision blurred for a moment and she closed her eyes, focusing on breathing again. Slow, steady. She told herself she had done nothing wrong. She repeated it silently, like a promise. Truth did not need shouting. It only needed time. At some point, a shadow passed over her face. She opened her eyes to see a cloud drifting briefly across the sun. The relief was small, but it mattered. Even the sky, it seemed, was willing to offer her a moment of rest. She thought about leaving the settlement someday, even before this happened. She had imagined finding another place, starting over once again. Now that thought felt less like an idea and more like an ending already written. But endings could change. As the sun dipped lower, the air shifted. The worst of the heat began to ease. Her body ached, but her mind felt sharper. Fatigue had stripped away fear, leaving behind clarity. People began to emerge again, drawn by curiosity as the day cooled. Some looked at her openly now, others whispered. She caught fragments of conversation carried by the wind. She hasn't moved. She's strong. What if it wasn't her? That last one made her heart beat faster. The man she had been watching stepped away from the group. He walked slowly, stopping near the supply shed. He knelt down, examining the ground. She could not see what he saw, but she could tell by the way his shoulders stiffened that something was not right. He stood up quickly, glancing around as if afraid someone might notice his interest. Then he walked toward the storage area, disappearing inside. She did not smile. It was too early for that, but the quiet hope inside her grew stronger, steadier. The desert around her remained unchanged, vast and patient. The cactus stood firm at her back. The sign still hung around her neck. She waited. Waiting had always been part of her life. Waiting to be accepted. Waiting to be trusted. Waiting for someone to listen. As the sky began to change color, she lifted her head slightly. Whatever came next, she would face it standing. The light in the sky slowly shifted as the afternoon moved toward evening. Colors softened, and the sharp brightness faded into something calmer. She noticed the change even though her body felt heavy and tired. The desert had its own rhythm, and she had learned to read it well. Her arms were stiff now. She moved her fingers gently, one by one, just to remind herself they still listened to her. Every small movement mattered. Standing still for so long made time feel strange, like it was stretching and folding in on itself. Across the settlement, things were no longer as quiet as before. People were talking more openly now. The day's heat had worn down their certainty, just as it had worn down her body. Doubt had a way of growing when things slowed enough for people to think. The man who had been watching earlier stepped out of the storage area. His walk was different now, faster, focused. He did not look at her right away. Instead, he moved toward the path that led away from the settlement, the same path the supply team had taken that morning. She followed him with her eyes as much as she could without moving her head. Her heart beat faster, but she kept her face calm. Hope was dangerous if it rose too quickly. He crouched near the edge of the path, brushing sand aside with his hand. He picked something up, held it close, then stood again. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in his shoulders. Whatever he had found did not match the story everyone had accepted so easily. She remembered how confident people had been that morning, how quickly the blame had settled on her. It was easier to point at one person than to admit a deeper problem. The man straightened and walked back toward the settlement, this time not hiding his concern. A few others noticed him and followed, drawn by his expression. Quiet conversations began. Heads leaned together. Arms gestured toward the path, toward the storage shed, toward her. She could not hear the words, but she could feel the shift. The sign against her chest felt heavier now, not because of its weight, but because it was no longer as convincing as it had been hours earlier. Truth had a way of pushing back, even when buried. Her throat was dry and her vision blurred again for a moment. She focused on the horizon where the desert met the sky. She told herself to stay awake, to stay present. This moment mattered. The man returned to the supply shed with two others. They went inside together. Time passed. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the ground. The cactus behind her cooled slightly as the heat eased. She thought about all the small moments that had led here. Every choice, every warning she had given, every time she had stayed silent to keep peace. Silence, she realized, could protect others, but it could also erase you. At last, the door to the supply shed opened again. The group stepped out, their faces serious. One of them carried the ledger she had worked on that morning. Pages were turned. Fingers pointed at lines written in careful ink. She recognized her own handwriting from a distance. The man spoke to the others, his voice low but firm. More people gathered, curiosity pulling them closer. The crowd grew, forming a loose circle near the center of the settlement. Eyes moved between the ledger, the path, and her. Someone shook their head slowly. Another crossed their arms, frowning. A third looked down at the ground as if ashamed. The story was breaking apart. She swallowed hard. Her legs shook slightly, but she remained standing. She would not fall now, not when the truth was finally finding its way into the light. The man walked toward her at last. Each step felt loud in the quiet air. People parted to let him pass. Some watched him closely. Others avoided looking at her altogether. He stopped a few steps away. For a moment he said nothing. He looked at the sign, then at her face. Really looked at her this time. His expression changed, something heavy settling in his eyes. "I found something," he said, not to her alone, but to everyone listening. Murmurs spread through the crowd. "The tracks don't match," he continued. "The timing doesn't match either, and the ledger shows she was here when the supplies went missing." Someone spoke up from the back, questioning him, pushing back. He answered calmly, pointing out details, small things that had been ignored, a missing tool, a mark in the sand, a change in routine that did not involve her at all. As he spoke, she watched faces change. Certainty faded, confidence cracked. The simple story they had held onto was no longer enough. She felt a strange mix of relief and exhaustion. Vindication was not a loud feeling. It arrived quietly, like a door opening after being locked for too long. Still, no one moved to untie her yet. The man noticed. His jaw tightened. He stepped closer, reaching for the rope around her wrists, then hesitated. He looked back at the others, waiting for someone to object. No one did. He began to untie the knot carefully. His hands shook slightly. When the rope loosened, she felt the blood rush back into her fingers, sharp and painful but welcome. She breathed out slowly, steadying herself. The sign was removed next. When it slipped away, she felt lighter, as if a weight she had been carrying for years had finally been lifted. She did not speak right away. Her voice felt far away, unused. The crowd stood in silence, unsure of what to do now. The punishment they had accepted so easily had been built on fear, not fact. Facing that truth was uncomfortable. "I warned you," she said finally. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. "I told you the route was unsafe. I asked to go with them." "Just truth." The man nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "You did," he said. Someone else spoke, offering an explanation, an excuse. Pressure, time, panic. She listened without interrupting. She had heard these reasons before, in different places, in different forms. The sun was low now, painting the sky in soft colors. Evening approached, bringing cooler air and longer shadows. The day was ending, but the damage it had caused would last longer. She stepped away from the cactus carefully, testing her legs. They held. She stood on her own, even as fatigue washed over her. People watched her closely, waiting for anger, for blame. She gave them neither. "What happens now?" someone asked. She looked around the settlement, at the buildings she had helped maintain, at the people she had worked beside for years. She saw regret in some faces, fear in others. "I don't know," she said honestly. "But I know this: next time, ask questions first." The man stepped forward again. "I'm sorry," he said. It was not a perfect apology. It was not enough, but it was real. She nodded once. Forgiveness, she knew, was a process, not a moment. As the crowd slowly dispersed, whispers followed. This time they were different, softer. Thoughtful. The simple story had been replaced by a complicated truth, and that would take time to settle. She remained standing near the cactus for a while longer, watching the sky darken. She felt drained, but also clear. What had happened could not be undone, but it had been seen, and being seen mattered. As night approached, she took a slow step forward, then another, moving away from the place where she had waited all day. The desert remained wide and quiet, unchanged by human mistakes. She walked back toward the settlement, not sure what awaited her there, but certain of one thing. She would never allow herself to be silent again. Night settled slowly over the settlement, not all at once, but in layers. First the heat faded, then the colors softened, and finally the stars appeared, quiet and steady above everything. She walked back among the buildings, her steps careful, her body still tired from the long day. Every muscle reminded her of how long she had stood under the sun. People made space for her as she passed. Some nodded, some looked away. No one spoke loudly. The energy had changed, but it was unsettled, like dust that had not yet settled after being stirred up. She stopped near her small room, resting one hand against the wall. She could hear voices nearby, low and tense. The man who had untied her was there, along with two others from the leadership group. They were talking about the supply loss, about responsibility, about what would happen next. She did not join them. Not yet. She needed a moment to breathe without being watched. Inside her room, she sat on the edge of the bed and drank water slowly, carefully. Her hands still shook a little. The quiet felt strange after a day filled with heat and waiting. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sound of her own breathing ground her. She thought it was over, or at least that the worst part was over. She was wrong. A short time later there was a knock at her door, not loud, not demanding, just a pause, then another knock. She opened it to find the man standing there. He looked tired, older than he had that morning. His confidence had been worn down by doubt and regret. "We need to talk," he said. She nodded and stepped aside. They did not sit. The room felt too small for that. He told her what he had found after untying her. The missing tool near the path had a marking only one person in the settlement used. The ledger showed a change in inventory made late the night before, not that morning. Someone with access, someone trusted. someone who had helped accuse her. As he spoke, pieces fell into place. Names she had avoided thinking about, small moments she had brushed aside. The truth did not shock her. It made sense. "Why tell me now?" she asked quietly. "Because it's not finished," he said. "And because I don't want to get it wrong again." That mattered more than he knew. They walked together toward the main building where more people had gathered. The night air was cooler now, but tension still hung thick between the walls. Lamps cast soft light, creating long shadows that moved as people shifted. The person responsible was there, standing near the table, speaking confidently, already shaping a new story. One that spread blame thin enough to avoid consequences. She watched them for a moment before stepping forward. "I want to hear it from you," she said. The room fell silent. The person turned, surprised, then quickly composed themselves. They spoke calmly, explaining decisions, pressure, the need to act fast. They spoke of risk and responsibility, of hard choices. She listened without interrupting. Then she asked simple questions, clear ones, about timing, about access, about the tool. Each question narrowed the space the story could exist in. The confidence faltered. Words slowed. Explanations tangled. The man placed the ledger on the table and opened it to the marked page. He pointed to the time written there. The room stayed quiet. At last, the truth could no longer hide behind urgency or authority. It stood exposed, plain and uncomfortable. The person lowered their eyes, not in shame exactly, but in realization that the game was over. No one shouted. No one rushed forward. Accountability arrived not as a dramatic moment, but as a heavy silence everyone had to carry. Decisions were made. Roles were changed. Trust was re-evaluated. The settlement did not fall apart, but it cracked in places where it had pretended to be solid. She stood near the back, watching it unfold. This part had never really been about punishment. It had been about being heard. Later, when the crowd thinned, the man approached her again. "You didn't have to come," he said. "Yes," she replied, "I did." They stood outside under the stars. The desert stretched wide and dark beyond the lights. It looked the same as it always had, honest, unchanging. "I keep thinking about the sign," he said quietly, "how easily we believed it." She looked up at the sky. "People believe what fits their fear," he nodded, "and I let mine speak louder than my trust." They stood in silence for a while. "What will you do now?" he asked. She did not answer right away. She had been asking herself the same question since the afternoon. Part of her wanted to leave as soon as her strength returned. Another part wanted to stay, to make sure this never happened to someone else. "I'll rest," she said finally. "Then I'll decide." That night sleep came slowly but deeply. When she woke, the settlement felt different again. Not healed, but aware. People greeted her carefully, some with warmth, others with uncertainty. Apologies came, some spoken, some only shown through actions. She accepted what felt real and let the rest pass. Over the next days, the truth settled into the routine of life. Supplies were recovered, routes were reviewed, new rules were discussed, this time with more voices involved. She noticed that people listened to her differently now, not with suspicion but with attention. Being nearly erased had somehow made her visible. Still, something inside her had changed. She visited the barrel cactus one morning, not out of pain but out of understanding. It stood the same as always, wide and steady, marked by time but still growing. She placed her hand gently against it and felt its quiet strength. Survival did not make noise. It did not ask for approval. It simply endured. As she walked away, she knew the final decision was coming soon. Whether she stayed or left, she would carry this moment with her. The day she had been left to wait. The night the truth came back. And the knowledge that even when others fail to see you, you must never stop seeing yourself. Morning arrived quietly, as if it did not want to disturb what had already been unsettled. The desert air was cool, carrying a softness that never lasted long. She woke before the sun, as she often did, and lay still for a moment, listening. The settlement sounded different now. Not louder or calmer, just more aware of itself. She sat up slowly, testing her body. The soreness remained, but it no longer felt sharp. It was the kind of pain that reminded her she had endured something real and survived it. She washed her face, drank water, and stepped outside. People were already awake. Some paused when they saw her. A few greeted her with careful smiles. Others simply nodded and continued with their work. No one ignored her anymore. That change mattered. She walked through the settlement, taking the same path she had followed countless times before. The supply shed stood open, tools neatly arranged now, as if order could erase what had happened. She paused there, running her fingers lightly along the wooden frame. She remembered standing in this place days ago, focused on numbers and routes, unaware of how quickly things could turn. The man approached her as she stood there. He looked more rested than before, but the weight of responsibility still showed in his posture. "They've asked me to tell you," he said, "that you're welcome to stay, your position is secure." She looked at him, studying his face. He meant it, and that too mattered. "Thank you," she replied. "I'll think about it." They walked together toward the edge of the settlement where the land opened into quiet space. He did not pressure her. He had learned, finally, to listen. Over the next few days, life moved forward. Repairs were made. Meetings were held. Decisions were discussed instead of declared. The person responsible for the loss no longer held power. Not everyone agreed with how it was handled, but no one denied the truth anymore. She worked when she felt able, slowly at first, then with more strength. People asked her questions, sought her opinion, not because she demanded it, but because they had learned the cost of ignoring it. Still, something inside her remained unsettled. At night, she dreamed of standing under the open sky, tied and waiting, not in fear but in silence. The dreams did not hurt, they reminded her. One evening she walked again to the barrel cactus. The sun was setting, painting the sky in soft colors. She stood where she had stood before, imagining the heat, the sign, the waiting. It felt distant now, but not gone. She realized then that forgiveness did not mean forgetting, and staying did not mean healing. The next morning she began packing. Her bag was small, she did not own much. What mattered most could not be carried anyway. People noticed. Questions followed. Some asked her to reconsider, others understood without needing words. The man came to her as she tied the bag closed. "You're leaving," he said. "Yes." "For good," she paused. "For now." They walked together one last time through the settlement. The path felt familiar but also finished, like a chapter that had reached its final page. "I should have believed you," he said quietly. "Before anyone else did," she nodded. "You did eventually, that counts." He stopped walking. "I'll carry this with me," he said. "What I did. What I failed to do." She looked at him then, really looked. "So will I, that's how we make sure it matters." They stood in silence, the desert stretching endlessly beyond them. When she turned to leave, she did not look back right away. She walked until the sounds of the settlement faded, until only wind and sand remained. Then she stopped and glanced over her shoulder. The buildings looked small from here, fragile, human. She felt no anger, no bitterness, only clarity. The desert welcomed her the way it always had, without judgment, without promise, just space and time and truth. As she walked forward, the sun rose higher, warming the path ahead. She did not know exactly where she was going, but she knew who she was now. Someone who had been accused and endured. Someone who had waited and been seen. Someone who would never again allow fear to decide her worth. Behind her, the settlement continued on, changed by what it had nearly lost. Ahead of her, the road opened wide. And she walked on, unbound, carrying nothing but her strength and the quiet certainty that truth, even when delayed, always finds its way back into the light. Tied to a barrel cactus with a sign reading "Traitor, last of the," she waited, until he saw something else.